What's up, everyone? It is JJ Zacharyson, the editor-in-chief of numberFire.com. It is April 16th, 2015, and I'm going to talk a little daily fantasy baseball with you. There's 6 games today. It is quite easily the ugliest slate that we've seen so far in the short season, and perhaps one of the ugliest slates that we're going to see throughout the season. There's really not a lot going on. To recap last night a little bit, we recommended Lance Lynn, Brandon Morrow. Both of them are pretty strong. Lance Lynn got the win. Brandon Morrow unfortunately did not, but he did only surrender 2 runs in 7 and some innings of work. Nelson Cruz was able to continue his hot streak. He homered once again. And then Anthony Rizzo also homered. So overall it was a decent night. Unfortunately, the under-the-radar plays on the Reds that I did throw out there did not pan out. The Reds looked horrible offensively, so that could have been a little bit of a detriment for you from a daily fantasy perspective, as it was for me. So let's look at today's slate. There's 6 games, like I said. The games are really, really not fun to look at. You have some really bad pitchers out there. But, from a pitching perspective, you also have Madison Bumgarner, who's going against the Diamondbacks. The Diamondbacks have just finished a 3-game series in San Diego, and the fantasy baseball gods said, hey, let's go throw you guys in San Francisco now, which is another pitcher's park. So I expect the Madison Bumgarner to do pretty well against the Diamondbacks, just because they're used to hitting in a hitter's park. We saw what happens when they made that shift to Petco. Now they're going to San Francisco. Bummy had over a 9 strikeout per 9 ratio last year, and I think that he's good in cash games for sure, even though you're going to have to spend up on him. Another guy that you could look to, I'm mostly going to have exposure to Madison Bumgarner, but another guy you could look to is Doug Fister, and the reason for that is because he's facing the Phillies. So the Phillies so far this year have not been super strong with their bats. They're a bottom 4 WOBA team in the bigs. They had Jeff Francoeur bat in the cleanup spot last night, just to show you how not good that lineup really is. The one thing with the Phillies, though, that's kind of interesting, I was looking at it today, is that they have a really, really low batting average balls in play average, which is fine, could be because they're not hitting the ball well, but they do have the 6th best line drive rate in baseball, meaning there could be some regression coming for the Phillies. So I just want to throw that out there. I think that's really interesting to think about when you're potentially throwing Doug Fister out there. This game opened up at a 6-run over-under, which was very, very favorable. The Phillies have one of the lowest team totals in the day. It's already shifted up to 6.5. So from a Vegas standpoint, it's getting a little frightening to throw Fister out there. He's not really a strikeout guy either. He had a 5.38 strikeouts per 9 ratio last year. So while Fister is definitely per our algorithms, is the second best option today just because of the matchup he has. At the same time, I think that there's reason for concern that you could go maybe even cheaper. So I think that he could be, he's listed as a number 2 option, but there could be better options just given price. And I do think that Madison Bumgarner then is definitely the number 1 option. Hitters. So the problem with today's slate is a lot of the big name hitters like the Giancarlo Stantons or the Jose Bautistas, the Edwin Encarnaciones, those high-priced guys don't have the platoon split, so it kind of is unfortunate. So Giancarlo Stanton is the guy that our algorithm likes the most. I'm going to throw Joey Bats out there as an option just because the Toronto game is a really high over-under. They have the highest team total against Chris Archer, and they're in a little bit better of a park. So I would probably play Bautista, but Stanton is the guy that's projected for the most fantasy points today, and you really can't fault that just because he's so good. But really, I think that what you're going to find is that you're going to use a lot of middle-tier priced players today. Like one guy that I really like is Brian Dozier. He's a great option because he crushes left-handed pitching, and he's going up against Vargas in Kansas City. It's in Minnesota. But he has a 371 WOBA against lefties in his career when it's a 297 WOBA against righties. So he's one guy that you always want to target whenever there's a platoon split. I actually like the Twins righties a lot today if you can throw them in your lineups. The thing with Dozier, too, is his price on DraftKings is really, really high. He's tied with D. Gordon as the highest second baseman priced. But on FanDuel, he's the 5th most expensive second baseman, meaning there's a little bit of a price gap there. So I think if you're going to target him, I think that you should use Brian Dozier on FanDuel more than you would on DraftKings. But I do think that he's a good option on both sites just because of the way this slate kind of is setting up. Another guy that I like a lot is Lorenzo Cain. I think that you can target a lot of Kansas City bats, especially the righties like Cain. Cain sees pretty significant splits whenever he gets the platoon. They're going up against Tommy Milone, who's he's very average. We have him throwing to a 4.84 ERA this year according to numberFire projections. So he's overall a very, very solid choice, Lorenzo Cain, as is the Kansas City lineup in general, who has a pretty high team total. And lastly is Adam Lind. So he has massive righty-lefty splits, like just crazy righty-lefty splits. When he faces right-handed pitching, which is what he'll face in John Lackey. John Lackey, first of all, doesn't see crazy splits depending on the handedness that he's facing, but Adam Lind does. His ISO jumps 100 points. His WOBA jumps over 100 points. I think because first base is kind of iffy today in general, just if you don't want to spend up on a guy like Edwin Encarnacion, I think that you can go with someone like Adam Lind and maybe get a little relief there from a pricing standpoint and get some power in your lineup, which is always what you're looking for in daily fantasy baseball. So the 4 bats, just to recap what I mentioned, Adam Lind, Lorenzo Cain, Brian Dozier, and, you could spend up on Giancarlo Stanton or Jose Bautista, but I think those middle-tier guys are probably the way that you want to go today, just given the way the slate is laid out. Pitchers, you have Madison Bumgarner as the top option, and then Doug Fister, who's a little bit iffy. I'm a little frightened about using Fister today, at least in cash games. I think I would just roll out Madison Bumgarner and go from there. Stacks. So 2 teams that I think you got to look at. I mentioned Kansas City. I like them a lot. I'm not against using the Twins, but I would also look at using Toronto, who's facing Chris Archer. Obviously, you can use Toronto every night just because those bats are so powerful, but I think today is another good time to use them, especially if you don't go with Madison Bumgarner in a GPP. You're going to get a cheap pitcher, so you're going to be able to throw some of those bats in there. Unfortunately, though, like I said, they're not facing a lefty pitcher, which would have been great because of all those righty bats they have in the lineup. So that's it for today. Good luck, everyone. Hopefully you can survive the ugly slate of April 16th, 2015. If you need any help, go to our questions app or go onto the site and ask questions on numberFire.com and check out our projections, the daily primer, and all the information and content we got going on there. Thanks, guys.